So hello. I welcome you on the next session. This session is going to be about change initiatives or change programs or improvement initiatives, how we call them, and why we typically fail at those, and what we can do to get better chances to succeed. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Pawel. I run Lunar Logic. Lunar Logic is an offshore web software shop. So if you like what I'm sharing, and you want to get a sense how it is to work with such an organization, you can always hire us. I also write a blog called Software Project Management, and if you look for more stuff around the topics that I share, there are typically at least one long blog post underlying for each idea that I'm going to share today. And also, you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Pawel Brodzinski. So I do appreciate any feedback you may leave for me there. And the first question: who was here on Martin's session? The very well, except of Martin. That's good. I mean, for those of you who've been there before, I will be talking about some of the stuff that Martin shared, except in a very different context. I will be telling you why they don't work. So you will get another perspective. So if not the constraints for the title of the session, for the length of the title, it would be probably titled like this. So change initiatives are like teenage sex. Everyone talks about it, but nobody really knows how to do it. But since everyone else says that they're doing it, everyone claims that they are doing it too. And this is kind of a sad message, isn't it? I mean, this says that we don't know how to make this thing work. And if you look for the kind of underlying research to find the numbers, you will definitely come across this one. This is John Collier from 1995. Basing on his research, what he said is that 70% of major change programs fail. I mean, this is kind of an old number. It's almost 20-year-old by now. So let's look for something more recent. McKinsey report, 2008. Same thing, 70% of change initiatives fail. How about a different source, Bain and Company? They're even more pessimistic. 70 to 90% of change initiatives fail. And it was kind of summarized by Ron Ashkenaz in, I believe, Harvard Business Review article. And Ron said that for more than 40 years already, the rate of failure with our change programs is steady. And this number is pretty sad. So obviously, one question we can ask is whether it is really so bad. I mean, all these numbers that I've just mentioned are disputed over internet. Like, people would disagree, what a change initiative is, what a change program is, what a success is in that context. So there is a lot of dispute, whether these numbers are valid. But I don't want to keep, any of those numbers as the ultimate one. What I want to point is whenever you look at any research regarding, how good we are at changing how we work, the short answer is we aren't good at all. So let's go and see why it is so. And actually, in terms of going and seeing, this is exactly what, and this is kind of a famous story, what some managers from American automotive industry did in early 80s. So they noticed how well Toyota is doing. So they decided to go for a trip to Japan to see, what they are doing differently. And Japanese were very, very open. They showed them everything, like processes, tools, how they organized, the factory floor and stuff. So Americans were a bit surprised, but they duly noted, all the details. Then they brought it to their companies. They implemented all this stuff, and guess what? It didn't work. Not a surprise. And actually, Japanese knew that. Like, sharing everything, being very transparent, they knew that the tools, processes, techniques is not nearly enough to make the same thing happen. That there is more that cannot be seen kind of, instantly when we just go and see. Because what those American managers did, they just copied tools and practices. And this actually has a name, a cargo cult. And the most famous example of cargo cult is from the Pacific Islands after the Second World War. So during the war, Americans, fighting Japan, would establish the military bases there. So they would build airstrips, they would bring airplanes, and obviously they were delivering all sorts of goods like food, weapons, and stuff. And some of those goods were shared with the natives. So it was kind of some freebies, good stuff. But then the war was over, Americans were gone, military bases were abandoned. There was no deliveries at all. So what some of the natives did, they tried to copy the physical artifacts that they've seen. They started building wooden airplanes and the air control towers and stuff, hoping that those physical artifacts would bring the goods again. Didn't work. But this is what, in that context, what those American managers did with their companies. And this is what we are doing in our companies over and over again. And then we wonder, why the heck our change initiative is failing? Because we are doing the cargo cult. So let's go and bust some of the myths around the tools and practices we use and talk about in different contexts, how useful they are, how they will help us to improve how we are doing with our organizations. So let's start with this one. Who heard the famous Deming thing about 95 of performance being attributable to the system? Okay, keep your hand up if you can come up with an exact quote. One? Thank you. Why am I asking that? Because this thing got super famous. I mean, like, we should be focusing on system, not people. But this thing is also wildly misinterpreted by everyone who is talking about it. Because if you actually read Deming, he wasn't talking about performance itself. He was mostly talking about performance variability. These are slightly different things, because you can have a performer who is delivering a very stable result, except they're not really great, they are mediocre. And at the same time, you can have a person who is delivering results all over the table, but they are good, great, or awesome. Now, would we really prefer the former over the latter? I'm not so sure. And then, again, if we are thinking about our context, software development, knowledge work, we should ask ourselves a question whether variability is that bad. Something that Deming kept, saying that, we should think about it, we should address that, because when we are at the factory floor and we want to produce the same thing over and over again, I mean, we don't want to have a huge variability in the outcomes. In our context, not so much. Features we build, every single one of them is unique in some way. And even if features one is similar to the other in the other products, products are unique. And actually, when we think about products, especially if you are in the context of, for example, startups, we want to achieve different results. Because software development is kind of a betting business. I mean, we don't want to produce the very same outcome with our new awesome product that we produced with our previous awesome product. I mean, who knows what Angry Birds is? Pretty much everyone. Who knows which product, which game of that studio was that?
72nd, I think?
52nd. 52nd game of that studio was wildly successful. They didn't want to achieve a mediocre success as with the previous 51 games that would allow them to survive 2 more months. They wanted to build this wildly successful game, 2 billion downloads. And they actually wanted to achieve a result very different than the result they were achieving with the earlier products. And then there is a thing, what actually is the system in our context, in the context of knowledge work? I mean, are they really managers who define what is the system, who define what is the process? And this is the point where I disagree with Martin. Because when you think about software development, who decides whether tests are written, unit tests are written, and whether they are written before the code or after the code, and what kind of tests they are, and how many of them they are? there are. I mean, it's very rarely a manager. Most of the time, it's a developer. And this is a part of a system. This is a part of our process. Who defines how developers communicate with product owners? I mean, it's not mandated, activity. Developers and product owners create that step of our process, create that step of that part of our systems. So in our context, in the context of knowledge work, people versus system is kind of a false dichotomy. It's not either or. As Jim Benson puts it, people and the system is a symbiotic relationship. One doesn't govern the other. So before we start using the system thinking stick and changing our organizations, we should start thinking, what kind of system is present in our organizations, because it's kind of different than it was on the factory floor. Or so I say. Another tool that we frequently use, as something to steer improvements, to change the way we work, is like WIP limits. When we introduce WIP limits, we will create slack time, and if we have slack time, it will be used to change the way we work, to improve our process, to improve efficiency and stuff, and we would achieve great results. And actually, I'm at least partially the one to blame. I mean, I've been sharing such stories for quite some time. And honestly, I've been sharing those stories because I've been with such teams. I've seen that happening. The continuous improvement steered by introducing WIP limits, creating slack time, and wise usage of that slack time. But later, I've seen a number of teams that were doing the same thing, and they didn't achieve similar results. Why? There has to be something different. There has to be something more. And when I see how people adopt Kanban, especially in the context of WIP limits, I typically see something like that. I mean, there's our part of the process that we care about, and we introduce WIP limits, we tweak them, we start measuring our throughput, and then we improve, and then we feel that we did a great job. And then we forget about the other parts of the whole value stream. Actually, the important bits of the value stream. This work-generating slot machine that replenishes our backlog. I mean, no matter how efficient we are, no matter how great we are, if the work items that hit our backlog are random and don't deliver value, what's the point in our efficiency? I mean, the only thing we will achieve is, as Stephen Parry says, cheaper, neater, faster waste. Kind of an achievement, isn't it? And then there's obviously the downstream part. So if we don't pay attention to that, our efficiency may only result in making those people who are, in the further steps of our value stream more miserable. Is that our goal? And by the way, the throughput of the whole system, as theory of constraints tells us, will probably drop. Because they will be handling, more stuff concurrently. There will be a toll that we pay for multitasking, and obviously, there will be more frustration. All the bad things will happen. So actually, the part of the process we should be paying attention to are most likely not the part of the process that we are in control of. So the question is whether we really limit WIP, and whether we really limit work in process in the right places of our value stream. And then obviously there's a question, what happens on the layer above that? What happens on portfolio level? How many projects we start? Do we say no to new projects the way we say no to new features on a team level? Because most of the time, I don't see that happening on that level. And then we end up seeing teams like that have 25 developers and 113 ongoing projects. And this is a real story. Each developer, on average, 4.5 projects. How efficient is that? I mean, efficiency on a team level isn't even relevant if we have this kind of situation on portfolio level. And obviously there is a question how people react on an everyday basis when they hit a WIP limit. If it's like, I'll just start this feature, I will just update it later so no one starts asking difficult questions. I've seen that happening as well. So it's not really about having those magic numbers on your whiteboard. It's about whether people understand, one of the values, understanding, how people understand the mechanics of whip limits, how they act on an everyday basis. And actually, if you ask me, how we are doing that in Lunar Logic, most of our teams don't have explicit whip limits. Why? Because they understand how working process limits work. They understand how they would behave given that we had whip limits, and they do that anyway. So what's the point of adding those explicit numbers, this coercive thing, as Prismats keeps saying? And at the same time, on portfolio level, as a principle, we never, ever assign a developer to more than a single project. I prefer to have a developer who is half busy with his project and half free, doing whatever, than to have them working on two concurrent things. And these are kind of whip limits in real, except we don't use any numbers. Then we have Gambar walk, going and seeing. So Gambar walk was described by Martin. I mean, he described this scenario that managers would go and see, and since teams are so aware of their problems, they just need those 15 minutes of attention of a manager. Well, that works in that scenario, except that Gambar walk initially was not to get attention of a manager, but for a manager to kind of spot problems, to see whether we have inefficiencies. So you know what? I went to a Gambar walk the other day, and this is what I've seen. It seems that work gets done, I guess. Problem with our context is that we don't have physical artifacts related to how we do work, how the work progresses. We don't see the piles and piles of code on developers' desks, do we? Whether that team is operating very efficiently or they are facing serious problems, they look exactly the same. And by the way, this means that we don't see, going for a Gambar walk, being with them for 15 minutes, it means that we don't see the crucial part of their work, because the crucial part of their work is not writing code. The crucial part of their work is collaborating, how they interact with each other, what they talk about, how they talk about it, whether they bring everyone into discussion. This is the important part of their work, and we won't see that in 15 minutes. So in the context of knowledge work, in the context of software development, Gambar walk is dangerously similar to the old concept from, I think, early 90s, which is management by walking around. A concept that, you would just hang around the office, chit-chat with people, and it would improve the way, the company is managed. And actually, if it was the only thing that moved a manager's butt from their corner office, that's better than doing nothing, but we should be so much better than that. So this is my answer to a Gambar walk concept, which I call a flying office, meaning that I don't have an office. I don't even have a desk. What I have instead is I have a beanbag and laptop table, so I will drop that in a corner of a room of one team or the other, and I will be sitting there in a corner for a longer time, because only then I can see how the work gets done. Only then I can see interactions between people, collaboration, all the important bits. And actually, sitting not at a desk, but on a floor level helps with one more thing. If there is a barrier, for a manager being present in a team, when people don't feel comfortable with that, sitting on the floor will make you pretty fast invisible, and people would stop acting and start behaving normally. So this is one more thing that you have to, that you need to see how the work gets done in the context of knowledge work. Strip yourself out of any management attributes. Another tool that we use to improve the way we work, Kaizen boards. Anyone seen one of those? quite a few people. I've seen quite a number of those, and I'm yet to see one that is working in the long run. I don't say it can't run. It can't work. I just say it's a pretty rare event. And when you think how Kaizen boards and Kaizen events, which is underlying concept, work, most of the time teams introduce those, hoping that they would steer improvements. Once we have a Kanban Kaizen board, all the improvements will happen. But actually, Kaizen board and Kaizen events were designed in kind of a different way. There was an assumption that all the experiments, all the improvements are already happening, and Kaizen board is just a mechanism to kind of facilitate that. So it's not that a Kaizen board would make us improving. Kaizen board would just reflect what is already happening. It's just a visualization tool or organization tool. So introducing Kaizen board and hoping that it would steer improvement is like introducing a whiteboard and hoping that it would organize our process better. Not going to happen. So the bit that is important in terms of steering improvements is what is perfectly summarized by famous words of Grace Hopper, and I keep getting flack for bringing that since it's like too close to anarchy for some, but this is exactly the attitude we want to see if we want our organizations to improve. It's better to ask forgiveness than it is to get permission. Only if we have that attitude across our teams, they would be trying new stuff, they would be experimenting, and then we can perfectly use a Kaizen board to visualize that effort if we need to, because if we are operating in a smaller context, we probably don't even need a Kaizen board. Now, this one was also mentioned today. Anyone familiar with this one? Improvement kata, yes. And this concept gets really, really popular these days. So the basic idea is that we try to understand where we are, so how we are operating right now. Then we define the target condition, true north, where we want to be. Then we define the next target condition, which is the next step we want to achieve, and then we run experiments so we eventually get to that next target step, and then we iterate. Now, that sounds like a pretty reasonable mechanism, except that when teams trying to adopt an improvement kata, they mostly think in terms of a tool. So, and the point where they fail at is typically the second step, defining the true north, the target condition. If you've seen one of those, and this is the exact quote, maximize the health of the community in a waste-free manner. What the heck does it mean? How do I make sense out of that? How do I know whether the next experiment I'm gonna run is going to bring us closer to that goal or not? How do I know whether my next action will bring us closer to that goal or not? I mean, if we fail at that, there is no point of using the whole tool altogether at all, because the rest is going to be equally meaningless. The other problem with improvement kata I see is what I call fallacy of measures, which is we are going to improve our lead time by 20%. And I've seen proponents of improvement kata sharing such examples. Why not 25? Why not 15? And by the way, why the lead time is going to be our ultimate goal? Are we going to become the most efficient company in the world? I mean, this is the goal? Where is the value in that? Because I don't see value. I mean, efficiency can be a means to an end, but it's not that end that we want to reach. So instead of introducing this pretty artificial mechanism, what I think is more important is to understand that we need some sort of a shared purpose, a common goal. And again, I can use a lunar logic example. I keep saying that we are not in software development business. We are in happiness business. What we want to achieve is we want to make our clients happy. And by the way, being a public speaker is a perfect opportunity to use your children's pictures in your slide deck. So having such a common purpose in the company makes it a perfect benchmark for defining whether the next improvement experiment we are running is going to bring us closer to that goal or not. I mean, is changing the way we work is going to make our clients more happy? Not only a client that we are working for, but all of our clients. And by the way, it also makes a perfect baseline for judging what's the next action within a project is, whether it's good or not. Does it give us a promise of making our clients happier? And if we have that, and if we have that shared purpose, we most likely don't even need that formal mechanism, to iterate on improvements, because people would do that anyway. So for the past 20 minutes, I was basically bashing quite a bunch of tools that we are using to improve our organizations, to change the way we work, that are typically blood of change programs. So let's try to finish with more optimistic view, which is how do we make that work? So this part you already know. Forget the tools. If you focus on the tools, practices, techniques, and you start with that, you are risking that you will end up with a cargo cult. So forget the tools. Start with common purpose. I mean, the thing that should align everyone's actions toward one direction. So having the common direction for everyone. So everyone has that benchmark that allows them to judge whether the next experiment they are running, the next improvement they are planning is going to be aligned with whatever we all try to achieve. And it's not, by the way, it's not enough to communicate that. It has to be shared. I mean, if we say, and we have to be authentic. If we say that we want to do no evil, as Google famously did, I mean, it's not enough when you see Google actually doing evil, right? So it's not that easy as it sounds. But beyond that, things get even more interesting, because the second bit that you need to have in place is the right organizational culture. The culture that supports changes, that supports running experiments. And why this thing gets interesting right now? Because the way we define organizational culture is that it is a sum of behaviors and beliefs of everyone in an organization, which basically means that you cannot directly change organizational culture. You cannot mandate such a change. But there is the second part to that. I don't believe you can change people's behaviors either. So Martin said that you can hack people's behaviors. I don't think I agree with such a bold statement. I think that you can mandate some changes, but once policeman is gone, people would get back to whatever the hell they want. So we cannot directly change people's behaviors either. And there is the third part, which makes the whole thing even more complex, which is Russ Ackoff, who says that the system is not a simple sum of everyone's behaviors. It's a product of interactions between people. Well, in our context, system is created out of people, not parts. Which means that even if we could change behaviors directly, we still cannot expect a simple and very predictable outcome in terms of the way we are trying to change organizational culture. So how do we make it work? There are two questions that we should be asking ourselves. First is, what are the constraints of the system? What is allowed? What is not allowed? What is encouraged? What is discouraged? What is rewarded? What is punished? All those things create the constraints of a system, creates a container within which all the people within an organization act. And if we believe in theory X, we believe that people would do the best they can to achieve the goal they are aware of. Which means that if we want to change how they behave, how they act against our common goal, we should change those constraints. So this is the matter we can work on. And there is a second question: what is acceptable? Because if we want to be an evolving organization, we have to assume that those constraints will be changing over time, and people will be challenging those constraints. So actually, if we write all the constraints in the stone, what we achieved is not a culture that would allow us evolving, changing, improving, but we just petrified the status quo. So again, we should know what is acceptable, how far people can go. And this is perfectly defined by Grace Hopper's words. Better to ask forgiveness than it is to get permission. This attitude is required to get our organizations changing. Because these are not experiments that are pre-designed and go from the top and are enforced on people that would make us improving. These are experiments that are done on the lowest possible level, on the line worker level. And for that, people need to have courage to try new stuff. People have to know what is the right thing, which is common purpose, and then they need to have courage and support to do whatever they believe bring us closer to that right thing, which is exactly that attitude. And this is so important, and this is why I mentioned that again, because when you think about such attitude, sooner or later, someone would screw something up, and big time. And the important part is how the senior management, how the leadership would react to that situation. Because if they start, if they start looking for someone to blame, if they start punishing people, they basically disable this. And for good. Because if I got burned trying to do the right thing, trying to improve the way we work, even if I failed to do that, I'm not trying anymore. And I'm telling everyone around that they shouldn't try either. So that change has to start from the very top. And I really love the answer that Martin gave for one of the questions after his session, that the thing that make the company that he's changing right now, keep going, is support from the very top management. And it doesn't even have to be kind of super active support. It has to be allowing people to do what is the right thing. And it's a funny thing is that when I was preparing that presentation and I was basically at that slide, I realized that it is super aligned with what Dan Pink says about intrinsic motivation. It's about autonomy, making our own decisions within the constraints we have, mastery, being better in what we do, getting better in what we do, and purpose, like having a common goal against which we are trying to achieve. And there is one underlying thing that has to be in place to make those three things happen, which is trust. Without trust, there is neither autonomy, nor mastery, nor authentic purpose. And this trust has to start going from the top to the bottom. So the best way to judge whether your organization, or whether any organization, will feed the majority of statistics of change improvements, which means failure, or the minority, is asking whether there is a trust that goes from the very top of the organization toward lower levels of hierarchy. If there is trust, they stand a chance. If there isn't such a thing, any change program that you will introduce will fail. And that's it. I think I ended quickly. So there is some time for questions. Any questions? I thought I was controversial. Not so much. Andy?
So I'd like you to talk a bit more about Whitman. So
I think there's a sense in which everybody limits work in progress. It's just the limit is too big very often. Occasionally, and I absolutely agree with you on the point that if our goal is to reduce lead time, if that's our only goal, we can do that very simply. We only have one thing in progress, everybody works on it until it's done. And why don't we do that? Well, part of it is because we want options, we want actually to achieve multiple things at the same time, or maybe see which is the one that works and so on. But so yeah, come back, because I took a photograph of your slide with the chickens and the map. Because yeah, I think that's what my team does when we break the whip limits.
Yep.
And so I think it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing to see how teams react to it. Say some more about whip limits. I'm also seeing other people tweeting about whip limits don't matter as long as you've got flow.
So the question is to say more about whip limits, how people react to a very event of violating whip limit or potentially violating whip limit. So that's kind of an interesting story. I realized how different people react to that situation when I was working with a team where we introduced whip limits, then we ignored them altogether. So we threw them away, and then instead of having explicit whip limits on the board, after every daily stand-up, which was beginning of a day, we would have a very brief discussion with the whole team, trying to decide what's the best for the whole team, like who should work on what. And it happened because like the catalyst for those discussions was a guy who was a developer, but he was willing to pick up the worst bits of everything, like adjusting an application to look good in IE7. I mean, the only thing worse is adjusting application to look good in IE6. And he was senior developer in that team. Like he could potentially pick, all the nice bits, but he was choosing the worst bits of work just to help the whole team go faster. And then I realized that we actually don't need those explicit whip limits because the team is mature enough that they understand the whole mechanism behind. And this is going from a very mechanical tool to the mindset, which is a totally different discussion. So this was one example, and then like if you start thinking in such terms, you may even want to choose a different way of coaching teams or mentoring teams, so that they're reaching this more mature level, directly without going through explicitly limiting work in progress thing. And then obviously, the simple mechanics of limiting work in progress pretty frequently, yields results like, okay, we will do that because this change is mandated. So it's like, meh. So I think that understanding and mindset is much more important than just a simple mechanism. And mechanism, like limiting, I'm a huge fan of limiting work in progress. But this mechanism, for me, right now, is a tool to elevate this behavior, this attitude, and once we have that, we can throw away the tool. Just like don't go into cargo cult. Any more questions? No? So I guess thank you all.